And we're very delighted to have with us from northern New Jersey, Maestro David Wroe, who is the conductor of quite a few orchestras, but in our case, the Orchestra Manhattan. David, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Steve, it's a delight to be here. Thank you for involving me.
Now, the first thing we want to talk about is that you were on the stage of the Weill Recital Hall on the 26th, and your orchestra, I believe, is the Orchestra Manhattan, accompanied, I think, about a dozen very gifted musicians. Uh,
Indeed, indeed. It was a mammoth program
yeah,
of
so
diverse offerings.
So tell us a little bit about how you got involved with virtual concert halls and what's it like to accompany so many gifted people in one afternoon or one evening.
Mm. Um, well, Steve, I've always had a foot throughout my career, one foot involved with working with young up and coming talent.
Hmm.
In addition to being the music director of various orchestras, present and in the past. I've been involved in education. Um, I was at Brown University, was the interim music director. I was at Montclair State University director of orchestras for 4, and NYU for another 4 years. So I try and couple
Yeah.
sharing my experiences and hopefully mentoring um, the next generation of talent in our business. I couple that with, of course, working with professional orchestras. So when I had the opportunity to work with virtual concert halls, I jumped at the opportunity because I liked the format, I liked the vision and the mission that they are aspiring to. And quite immediately, that launched me into a collaboration last November with a newly formed orchestra, actually called Orchestra Manhattan, which is made up of top flight professional freelancers from the tri-state area, of the East Coast being New York City, New Jersey, and Connecticut, and maybe a few players sometimes from Philly. We come together for short, intense periods of time and do project-based activities. And here we were, Orchestra Manhattan, collaborating with virtual concert halls. Now, to answer your question of accompanying, well, there's two accompanying concerti and then accompanying young and up and coming talent. It is as many musicians may be listening to us, and you yourself know, the art of conducting indeed is a specialized skill unto its own, and sometimes diametrically opposed to the benevolent dictatorship of a conductor, say conducting a Brahms symphony or a Mahler symphony or the like. It is, you are, I believe, a good accompanist is really at the service of the soloist to provide a well coordinated, literally, accompaniment, which serves more than 50%, I would argue, the desires of that soloist and his or her interpretation of the piece we're playing. So that skill is one of listening. That skill is one of bending and being making in-flight adjustments, and a whole host of other supportive skills to make the soloist shine. So that's a skill which is quite unique, and some conductors really don't, not maybe do have that skill or don't, but also sometimes because the skill itself is, as I mentioned, different to controlling an orchestra and leading it through a performance. Some conductors don't like to do it because it's handing off authority, if you like. But I tend to really enjoy it because it is very different from what I normally do, and it's much more of a collaborative mentality, and the art of catching a soloist, and if it's caught well, I get innate pleasure out of doing that. Now, the other part of your question, I think, was so many so many soloists. Indeed, the program had at least 7, 8, 9 performers, I think, if I remember correctly, that evening.
9.
9, thank you, yes. In diverse stroke contrasting concerti.
Right.
We jumped from Mozart to Beethoven to Prokofiev to
Puccini.
to composer performer concerti. So there was great variety that evening, but additional skills needed from the professional orchestras and myself in coordinating in a heartbeat, not only a professional accompaniment, but also jumping from style to style, which for me and our musicians, members of Orchestra Manhattan, is great fun.
With not much rehearsal time.
With not much rehearsal time. As you know, in the business in America, it's an expensive endeavor putting a lot of very fine professional musicians on stage. So we do it in a very, very compressed time, maybe 2 rehearsals. However, American freelance and professional musicians are famed throughout the world as being very quick readers and coming prepared, and secondly, being very, very skilled at reaching a high level very soon. At the risk of bragging from my own heritage, London is also a very good place for musicians to do that as well. Mm-hmm. So the only other thing I might throw in, and I'm sorry if I'm dominating the situation, the conversation here, is that in addition to accompanying different the art of accompanying and then many different styles, we are now dealing with another curveball here, which is dealing with wonderfully talented but maybe less experienced soloists on stage who might not have played the Prokofiev second violin concerto 50, 60, 70 times before coming to me. Many of them are green, maybe many of them performing indeed the concerto that they're performing for the first time. So that calls for us, the accompanying musicians, to pay special attention to attempt to accommodate sometimes a rigidity. They are not necessarily have the skill to make in-flight adjustments of tempi or dynamic or any little bump in the road which might happen in performance. But that's not a criticism. I mean, we had an 11-year-old playing Mozart piano concerto in G major, K251, I think. You can't scold an 11-year-old for pulling off a marvelous performance of that, but then maybe not showing the quite the flexibility of Yu Zhuang.
Yeah.
So I'm talking too much, but there are many moving parts involved in this unique situation.
Maestro, you are the music director and conductor of the Orchestra Manhattan, and we've just discussed your role at this concert accompanying all these musicians, but you also are in recording sessions with virtual concert halls, including a wonderful performance with Stas Venglevsky, the accordion performer. So tell us a little bit about the difference of playing in a recording studio and making records for virtual concert halls.
Yes. It's an equally stimulating activity. It's very pleasurable because it's the company, just from non-music, talking of in the non-musical realm for a second, it's a pleasure to be involved because we are really giving a relatively fresh and affordable platform for people to come and work with top-class professional musicians and make recordings. And then also partner with virtual concert halls to hold their hand all the way through post-production, editing, refining, labeling, and distribution. And that is a daunting task that can be a very, very expensive and cost-prohibitive process. and I'm pleased to be just part of the cog in that wheel, a big cog, suffice to say, indeed actually making the recordings, but a part of that process to enable up-and-coming musicians and aspiring musicians an opportunity to get their work out statewide, nationwide, and worldwide. So it's a pleasure at that level to be part of a worthwhile endeavor. The style, of course, of recording as opposed to conducting, on the one hand, it is quite intensive in that once the red button, the recording button, is going, you're in a performance, so to speak. You're live, and so that does have that intensity. And whereas, yes, we can make some modifications in post-production, in post-recording, post-production, it does have that intensity. We have a little more of an opportunity to refine it in going over things again and again. It's another form of rehearsal, but the style is just slightly different. The acoustics are very different, of course, depending on where a live performance is taking place, as opposed to a recording hall. So similar and different to a live performance, but equally invigorating.
Was the Orchestra Manhattan also involved in the composition that was arranged? I forgot the name of it was arranged it was a cello sonata, and he arranged it for piano and orchestra. Was that you involved in that piece?
I'm not sure. Probably not. That does not ring a bell.
Well, let's talk then about the piece that was for accordion and orchestra.
Yes.
Sasa and Gleska. Let's talk just a little bit about that. What was that? Had you ever recorded a piece with an accordion soloist?
I have not. I performed a little, but never recorded. And the added pleasure stroke benefit, of course, that the performer was the composer.
Right.
Now, that brings up an interesting topic, doesn't it, Steve, of whether it's an advantage or a disadvantage for the composer to be in the room when performing. And, you know, these debates of watching Stravinsky conduct his own work with more or less success has sparked the debate of whether whether a composer actually is the best interpreter of their own work. I mean, that we could talk for hours about that.
Right.
But in this case, yes, the composer and the performer, the solo performer, was one and the same. It's pleasurable because the performer stroke composer is going through a new experience. I can see that their enjoyment or their sometimes perplexed response or what they're going through is an intensification of just being a soloist or just listening to your piece being composed. That's interesting and enjoyable to witness and be part of. Secondly, I think it is a learning process for the composer. In this case, I think he was experiencing things and making immediate little changes in his mind on the spot to the composition. So it was like the piece was being in certain moments and in certain aspects, such as articulation, such as dynamics, and indeed in terms of potential repeats or non-repeats, affecting the scope, the length, the scope, and the balance of the piece. He was making changes as we were rehearsing it. So he was faced with the unique experience of a situation of experiencing sensory activity, which was making him change the piece. And wow, so we're there in the kitchen watching him cooking.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and then very quickly laying it down. So I guess we we musicians were part of the composition process.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
he was making little improvements, saying, I didn't, when sitting at a music stand in my own studio, composing this and playing this, I didn't envisage that it would sound like this. So I'd like to make little changes. That's fascinating and wonderful
Yeah.
on the spot recreation.
So we're talking about the piece for accordion and orchestra by Stas Venglevsky, and that I understand that the recording will be out soon. We're looking forward to it, and I can't wait to hear it. Maestro, I want to thank you very much for your time. It's been a fascinating discussion. I feel we only just got going. I did want to talk to you, but we don't have time about your association with the Boston Symphony.
Another time.
I'm calling you from Boston, so I grew up in Brookline, Mass, so I know a little bit about the area. But thank you very much for your time. We'll look forward to these recordings, and I hope to meet you in person one day.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you, Maestro.
Bye-bye.